Hello, and welcome to episode 62 of Design Curious Podcast. I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. And it is fall time of year as this episode is coming out. Tomorrow is Halloween, so I am fully into sweater weather and candy corn and all the fun fall things. It's one of my favorite times of year. And so I hope you are enjoying fall time as well. And also, fall is a great time of year to really start to reflect about what is going on in your life. Are you where you want to be? What are the steps you can take to get where you want to go? And if that's you and you want to be an interior designer or start your own business doing residential design, then I encourage you to get into My Design Mentor, which is a mentorship program I developed. In that program, you'll get a lot of great advice, a lot of knowledge, and you have the ability to work one-on-one with me to get mentored in the career. And as you will find out in today's episode when we're talking to Justine Sterling, that mentorship is a huge part of being successful as an interior designer. So like I just said, today on the podcast, we have interior designer Justine Sterling out of Boston. And let me tell you a little bit more about her. She is an award-winning full-service designer who believes that the key to a well-designed and loved home starts with you taking you on a journey through self-discovery. Whether you're working with Justine on a full home furnishing and renovation project or a new construction home or meeting with her one-on-one for invaluable design expertise, her discovering home process allows her to intimately understand the design elements that will bring surprise and delight to your home. Justine Sterling design aesthetic is clean, layered, approachable, modern, yet cozy, and filled with texture. Justine Sterling design projects have been featured in many publications, such as New England Home Magazine, North Shore Home, Modern Luxury Interiors Boston, the Boston Globe, Ocean Home, and Boston Home Magazine. Located just north of Boston, Justine is an award-winning interior designer who has built a portfolio of residential construction and furnishing projects since 2008, varying from urban condominiums to renovations and new construction home endeavors. She has a newfound love for tennis and Pilates and resides just north of Boston with her husband, son, and daughter. And let's hear now from Justine. You're now listening to Design Curious, a place where you, creative one, are here to learn about what it really is like to be an interior designer. And I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. If you're worried about how to succeed in a creative career, if you're ready to learn your next steps to become an interior designer, and if you want the satisfaction of doing something you love every day, you are in the right place. Grab a coffee, a notebook, and let's dig into today's episode. Hi, Justine. Welcome to Design Curious Podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So how about for our audience, you kind of talk a little bit about the area that you work in and kind of the design that you do right now.
So I work in residential design, and the kind of interior design work that I do right now is focused pretty much solely on residential homes in the greater Boston area where I live. I do have a smaller commercial project, which I've thrown into the mix for this year, but typically working with residential clients, as I mentioned, in the area close to me. I'm about 20 minutes north of Boston.
Okay, that's fun. Do you like to spice up things with commercial projects now and then, or is it kind of a rare thing?
This particular commercial project came to me via a friend of a friend. And so I got interviewed through that process where they were looking for someone to add the finishing touches really to their commercial space. So it really wasn't a full rehab of commercial space or coming up with a completely new concept. It sort of just intrigued me because I felt like I could put a residential stamp on a commercial job. I do have a lot of commercial experience in my background, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little later. But this seemed like something fresh and interesting because, as you know, as an interior designer, depending on the field that you're in and the type of specialty that you're specializing in, if you will, like me in residential design right now, it can be nice to spice things up, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun. Okay, well then let's talk about how you got into design and how you became an interior designer, or was it something that you were always interested in?
The story goes back a really long way to when I was in high school. I loved art and I loved painting. And I think it was when I was in I'm from South Africa, hence the accent. I'm from Cape Town. And the art teacher that I had, a new art teacher came in, his name was John Cowan. And I want to say he came in when I was in the standard 8, which is the equivalent of, I've got to do the math here, standard 8, it's a sophomore. Standard 8 is a sophomore. Okay. Yeah, the equivalent. So it was, those last couple of years in high school. And he was just wonderful and really helped all of us, get more into art. And I always landed up painting things around my house. And I lived in an old Victorian. So one of the biggest paintings that I still remember doing, it was like a mixed media, I was a little artsy with, bells around my ankles and very, very, very laid back surfer girl that used to paint these like giant paintings. And it was always blowing up things that I saw around my house. So I do these sketches low down, looking up at the staircase, and it would be the balustrade details of all the wood and the turnings, or it would be the windows, but all the trim. And I remembered loving drawing all the trim and the detail. Who knows why? I didn't even know what interior design was at that stage. And he picked up on that, which was really interesting.
Oh.
And he suggested that a bunch of us go down to the art and design school. And I was like, well, what's that? And this was probably now when we were juniors, if you will, as an equivalent in Cape Town. And he took a bunch of us down. There may be about 10 of us from the art class that were interested to know, what is the art and design school? What do they offer? I didn't even know what I was going to do or where I was going to study. I didn't have anybody else in my family that had gone to college. So I was really the first one that would be on that sort of trajectory. So he took us to the art school and he said, well, this is graphic design. And we went through the classrooms. This is photography. And then we also went across the building to the textile design. And then we walked into interior design. And I was like, oh my word, what is this? And there was this girl, I can still picture it. She was doing a 3D watercolor rendering, a 3D rendering. And I was like, I want to do that.
Oh, wow.
It was so funny. Like I saw this rendering and it sort of clicked in my mind like, wow, that looks like fun, not knowing where you would go with that as a job or anything else. But I was like, that looks really cool and interesting. My mother had also been working at Ogilvy and Mather, an ad agency. So I did know a little bit about what graphic design could do and where that could take me. And my art teacher suggested, he said, look, apply for both, apply for graphic design and interior design. You just never know also what you may get into. So I was lucky enough to get into both and then choose.
Nice. Yeah.
So I picked interior design. And that was sort of the infancy of where my kind of love of interiors probably started. Another little crazy fun story. I hope I'm not talking too much on this topic. But another crazy little thing is that, and these are things you remember later in life when you're looking back as to how you landed up where you did. My girlfriend, Victoria, and I used to play in her playroom. I didn't have a playroom at home, but she did. She lived in a giant home and she had this enormous blackboard. I want to say it was 8 feet by 8 feet. It was probably a lot smaller, but that's how I remember it as like an 8 or a 9-year-old. And we used to draw Barbie's house, Barbie and Ken. Our Barbies lived in the same house. Ken's lived there too, and all the kids. And we had multiple bedrooms and you know what, and we drew the rooms on the blackboard.
Oh, yeah.
And then her dad had a little workshop. And one day, I guess we were like, well, Barbie needs furniture. So he would work with us in the workshop. We built miniature furniture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for this blackboard. Like I want to say it was like a pretty big scale, like chairs were, maybe like 3 inches tall to what would be 18 inches, right?
Yeah.
For a seat. So that was just another weird thing that I remembered like early on in my career as to this connection between how I landed up in interior design and between what I do today. So the program that I did at the Art and Design School back then in 1988, the most years you could study interior design for was 3 years back then. and it was called a diploma. You took 10 subjects a year. Your foundation year, you took a lot of industrial design, photography, graphic design. They kind of got you immersed in many different design fields, because some people did actually still end up switching after that first year. But I stayed on the course of interior design.
Okay.
And it did the full 3-year program, and it was a full-time program. And when we were done, I was lucky enough to win a couple of bursaries and kind of almost like a scholarship that I got throughout the years for different projects that I did.
Nice.
It was the first time in my life I was really doing something that I loved. I was never much of an academic. I was a bit of a sporty girl. So finally finding something that I really loved was exciting. And I landed up, then getting great grades. And the first company that offered me a job, I just took it. I probably should have looked a little harder. I was so excited to get offered a job.
Yeah.
So I landed up working in a firm that did offices, like office design, almost like what you in America call a dealership. But on the lower level, they did all furniture classics. Like they were one of the only people that brought in Knoll, Herman Miller, and such. And it was the only place really in South Africa, I think, where you could buy that sort of furniture. This is, way back in 1990. So I was exposed to a lot of the classic pieces of furniture, but my job wasn't that exciting. I was helping with laying out furniture for offices, not on a very large scale because I was working in-house. And then every now and again, I'd get exciting projects where I would design furniture, like custom pieces of furniture for some of the different projects. So that was really fun.
That's cool. Yeah.
And that's really how I kind of got into interior design. And spoiler alert, here I am 33 years later, still doing interior design.
Yeah. I mean, it sparked a passion that definitely has not been extinguished yet. So that's great that you kept going. Okay, yeah, I do want to know because so you were at the commercial design place and you were probably doing like templates for offices or like just space planning, right?
Right.
So after you had that, how long were you there for? And then where did you transition to residential?
So I was there for about a year, and then I laugh because she makes me laugh, this woman that I landed up working for after that. She was originally from Canada, and she reminded me of the woman that's in The Devil Wears Prada, where she comes in the morning and she throws her coat on the desk and you got to pick up behind her. Yeah, so I worked for her, and I had no clue what I was doing in residential design. It's not something that they really teach you about at school. I had all the foundations. I could draw. I understood scale. I understood color. I understood all the things. But, when she asked me to source something that was very specific to residential, I kind of needed to be mentored. And she wasn't the kind of mentoring personality. So she definitely didn't uplift me in terms of making me feel good about my capabilities. I always felt like she made me feel like I didn't know what I was doing at that early stage in my career, which is not great. And I think it does happen to a lot of people, but I really did not get a good taste of residential design way back in my early career. So as soon as I could get out of there, I was like, I need to just work for a slightly bigger firm that has other people that I can learn from, because I wasn't learning really from anybody else. There were some contract designers that came in and out that worked with her, but I really didn't have like a true mentor. So I landed up then moving to a firm called Eric Hoffman and Associates in Cape Town that primarily did hotels.
Oh.
And they worked with brands like, here in the States, like Holiday Inn and Intercontinental, etc. But then they also had their own brands as well that were unique to South Africa. And we actually worked just outside South Africa too. So, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and other surrounding countries. We often worked in those countries as well. And I absolutely loved working there because I finally had a much bigger firm that I could work in and learn from other people. And that is honestly something that I always tell young designers when they come to me and ask for advice. I often will tell them to go and work in a bigger firm. Doesn't need to be hundreds and hundreds of people, but I would say my best experience that I've always had as a designer and the confidence that I had to start my own firm 15 years ago was really because of that.
Okay.
Because there was so much that I learned and I understood all the different roles that you needed within a firm, especially if you're doing really large projects.
Yeah.
So at the hospitality firm, we primarily worked on capital expenditure projects for hotels. So they would have a set budget for upgrades to one hotel, and it might be redoing 300 rooms. So you'd be making up mock-ups, doing a lot of customized things. Like in South Africa, we didn't have access to a lot. So we'd custom design the carpet, custom design fabric, custom design the furniture very often, and we would get it locally made, even custom designing lighting.
Wow.
I don't know if it's as much like that anymore in South Africa, because this was right around the time of apartheid getting abolished. And once that happened, we did have access to more. But I would say it was a different time back then. But it was great experience because I understood how to design rugs and going to factories and all of that. We even used to design tile.
That's really a good, I think, learning experience. Like, because not often, I think nowadays designers get that experience working for someone else of doing custom things, because it's so available off the shelf, or you just order it, and they don't have the capability of being able to sketch out something and then say, I want this color here and make it this design and this fabric or material or whatever. I think that's just a great opportunity that you had. Do customizing a lot then in your designs nowadays?
I wish that I could. I find a lot of custom in residential sometimes is cost prohibitive. I have done some things, we have changed colors. I'd say the most customization of things that I do will be designing pieces of furniture.
Okay.
I find dining tables, almost always I will customize off a standard or customize from scratch. And coffee tables. There seem to be two things, and console tables, actually. Funny enough. I have one that I've now repeated like 3 times in homes in different versions of it, because I'm like, it's the perfect back of sofa console table, and I could never find one. So those tend to be things that I'll often customize. And then I'll even be like, well, what wood could it be? And what stain could it be? Or is it painted? So I do love doing that. It not only sometimes becomes cost prohibitive for the client, I'd say for fabrics and rugs. Furniture, not so much. I don't find it costs a lot more to do custom furniture. But yeah, it's definitely something fun to do that I wish I could do a little bit more of. Clients also don't always want to pay for all that additional time that it's going to take the designer to do. And I certainly only propose to do custom when I think that it is something that's necessary to the end goal of the project. It's rare that we'll ever have a client with an open checkbook, even if they have gobs of money.
Right.
Yeah. But back to the hospitality with Eric Hoffman and Associates, it was just great experience. He was hysterical, Eric himself. I think he used to like have a little flask of something under his desk and he'd get really funny in the afternoons.
Oh, good.
But for the rest of the design studio, there was just such a good mix of really, really talented, far more senior than me designers. There was Jill. She was also, that's back in the days we used to smoke in the office, by the way. Yeah. So Jill always had the cigarette hanging out of her mouth, but she did purchasing. And I still recall the lady that used to sit on the other side of my little, screen used to smoke cigarettes all day too. So I used to come home smelling like a cigarette. But besides the smoking in the office, we churned out some really, really good work. And at that time, I worked with one of our clients that worked for the global group that was, well, when I say global, I mean within South Africa, or national group called Southern Sun that encompassed all these different hotel brands. I'd had a really good rapport with him. And one day, I think he invited me out to lunch and he wanted to see if I wanted to come and work in Johannesburg. Because they were looking for someone to run their design department up in Johannesburg. And I was like, well, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Young, I was in my early 20s and I was like, well, I've got nothing to lose. Tell me more. And the minute he said company car, I was sold. I was like, yes, I'm going to move. There's a company car. So I sold my car 2 months off and traveled around Europe, came back, and then moved up to Johannesburg.
Oh, fun.
So that's essentially, it's like 750 miles, just to give all your listeners that haven't been to South Africa some insight. So it's a 2-hour plane ride from Johannesburg to Cape Town. So it's not close.
Yeah.
And it's also, the downtown Johannesburg itself is pretty dangerous now. It's extremely dangerous. But where I worked was in a place called Sandton, which was the nicer area just outside Johannesburg. And that's where I landed up living. So I'd sort of got all that good experience at Eric Hoffman, and he obviously felt that I was good enough to run the little in-house design department.
Yeah.
And I felt that I was ready for that. And that was I think I was 24. So I was still very young.
Yeah.
But I had taken charge in a lot of the hospitality projects. So he must have seen something in me that he thought that I'd be able to, do something similar for them up in Johannesburg. Yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, I was now on the other side sometimes, where I would help put the CapEx, this capital expenditure together for certain hotels with essentially the project managers that are in-house at Southern Sun. But we'd also have the purchasing agents at Southern Sun. And then I was just purely design. So it was a really fun opportunity to help come up with the concepts from the ground up of, what do we want the hotel concept to be? And I would sometimes even work with outside designers on helping guide them as to what some of the standards may be and how to do certain things in a guest room, how to keep the prices at bay, because you're multiplying the rug by, 300 rooms or 500 rooms.
Yeah.
How to, work on mock-ups. Often our mock-ups we build a lot in brick and mortar in South Africa. It'd be like just this brick square in the middle of the job site, which would end up being the mock-up room for the hotel that hasn't gone up yet. So it was very exciting. I loved working up there. But after about 3 years, I did have a lot of great opportunities, like working on game farms. So many fun stories that I'll tell you. But actually, I have to tell you one quick one. It's just jogged my memory here. Imagine hopping in a truck, basically, and seeing leopards and elephants and dung beetles, whatever, all the wildlife on your way to meet the rest of the people on a job site.
Wow.
Or imagine hopping in the little 4-seater Cessna airplane because the structural engineer has a plane and he just thinks it's faster to fly there. And he lands on the grounds where the job site is. So I had a lot of crazy opportunities like that, where I would fly all over the place and design some really, really cool things. And during the time I was there, I got really spoiled with staying in the most incredible properties all over within South Africa and also just outside South Africa, in Zimbabwe, etc. And in Kenya. I worked in a hotel in Kenya. So just really, really cool experience. I'd say one of the reasons that I decided it was also time to move on is I got a bit sick of the weekly traveling. I was traveling everywhere almost every single week. And that did get a bit much. But what it did teach me a lot about was working within a bigger hierarchy, within a bigger firm. I learned a lot of budgeting for very large scale projects that I hadn't done before. I also learned about managing staff. I did have 2 direct people that worked for me within the in-house department, but then also worked parallel with a lot of other departments. So it was just really cool experience, just from many, many aspects. And I love my time there.
Yeah.
But I decided that it was time to spread my wings even further and started to think that I wanted to move overseas. And this was when I was like 27 now, I want to say. And I'm glad that I thought about it then, because it's not something that you're going to want to do in your 30s or 40s probably.
Right, yeah.
When you're just far too settled down. But I still wasn't really tied down. I wasn't married or anything like that yet. Initially had set my sights on maybe Europe, but one of the salespeople that I worked with, he sold Milliken carpeting, which is it's a very big offering in the hospitality industry. And I used to work with him, and his wife, who I met in South Africa, had invited me to come overseas with them. So that was kind of the beginning of how I landed up in Boston, because they came to Boston, came on a holiday.
Is that your first time in the States?
It actually was my second. I'd
Okay.
actually come here. I'd taken many trips overseas. I was very lucky with different firms that I'd worked with in South Africa. And one of them was a trip with Milliken to Georgia, which was just amazing. And they also took us to New York City. Oh, and to Disney, Florida.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they took us all over. So I was
Nice.
very lucky that I got to experience all of that. But I'd never seen the East Coast.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with Charlestown and Beacon Hill and different areas in Boston. And I just thought to myself, well, is there a way that I can come here? So again, I'm going to cut the story kind of short, but when I landed, there is obviously a little bit of a love interest, but I'm not going to get too.
We don't need to go there.
We don't need to get into the love interests, because this is really a podcast about design, right?
Right.
So I landed up in Boston, and one of the places that I interviewed with was Elkis Manfredi Architects, and I'd interviewed with several bigger design firms. I didn't know of any of residential firms. I didn't look into that. I did dabble into, should I go work in a hospitality firm? Because that's where the majority of my experience was.
Yeah.
But then a couple of different people that I'd connected with said that I should really try for a job at Adink, Gensler, or Elkis Manfredi Architects. And so I'd interviewed with all of those and a bunch of others, and landed up getting a job at Elkis Manfredi Architects. They are probably one of the most well-known bigger architecture firms in Boston. They do work nationally. I think they actually do international work now. And that was the job that I was at for a full 8 years before I started my own design firm.
Okay.
So I really did find my feet there. I just loved working in a big design studio. I also loved the fact that if you showed initiative in the design firm, they let you kind of run wild and take and lead with the projects that you did. So I sort of felt like I was offered an opportunity to take on projects and really run with them and build the team as I wanted to. I mean, there was obviously always a senior architect that was kind of ahead of each studio, but it was incredible where you could essentially be picking and choosing the people that you could pull onto your team, whether be it architects because you had a lot of really technical drawings you needed help putting together, or people that were really good at doing your presentation work. I could not work in Photoshop and Illustrator at all. So now I can.
Yeah.
But I always had people doing that work for me. And Elkis Manfredi Architects was also the place where I learned how to build an incredible set of construction documents, which again is something that you're not always going to get, I think, at a very small firm. I mean, some firms are really unique, and if the owner of the firm has the time to spend with you, they can nurture you. But I've always loved the fact that I was able to get that experience there, and I still draw to this day.
Yeah.
Not as much as I used to, but I love getting into a CAD drawing, and that's why that is the software of choice in my firm, is simply because I can use it, and I just don't want to have to learn Revit or something else to this stage.
Yeah, it's in the same way, because I learned AutoCAD working for an architect and a couple different architects, and so that's just what I'm used to, and I don't want to learn anything else.
Right. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah. But Elkis Manfredi was just an incredible firm to work for. I think I added it up one day. It was over 1 million square feet of space in the biotech industry.
Wow.
That I landed working on just in the Cambridge area. It's kind of across the Charles River from Boston. It's Cambridge. And I got to work with clients like Novartis and Millennium Pharmaceuticals, and I worked on an incredible building close to the time that I'd left called the Broad Institute, which is run by Eric Lander. These are all, anyone that's in biotech or has knowledge of it will probably know of these companies. And they were just so fun to work on. And I loved taking this blank floor plan, this blank slate essentially, and then learning all about this new company and how they work and the scope that each person needed that worked within the company to really fine tune these incredible floor plans. And I feel like that's where I really got so good at space planning. And David Manfredi, who is still there at the firm, Howard Elkis has sadly passed away many years ago, but David Manfredi was always just so great in being such a great leader. He kind of left you to your own kind of devices, let you kind of do your own thing, but he was always there to, help guide, but also help show you the way that he liked to present. Like he always wanted 3 options.
Oh, okay.
There were always 3 floor plans. Like we probably knew where we wanted to guide someone, but
yeah,
I do recall that. I don't know if it's still the same way, but I always remembered always needing 3 really good, solid ideas,
okay.
not just one.
Yeah.
Sometimes even more, that you could show to him that he could kind of tweak that could become the final result for that particular company. So,
wow, what a great journey. And so then out of there, you started your firm, you said?
yes. So I had my daughter in March 2008, which, if you remember, was the beginning of really not a very good time in the
Yeah.
US.
A bad time to start.
A bad time to start. So, but what had happened was it was simply the fact that my daughter was super colicky and I could not imagine leaving her at a daycare. It was that simple. And I was meant to go back to work and I let them know one day I'm actually not coming back. The plan was to just take a few months off and then come back.
Yeah.
And I just did not come back. So that was a bit sad because I didn't really get to say like official goodbyes to anybody.
Yeah.
I was really going on maternity leave and didn't come back. And then started to put my feelers out for what type of work I could do on my own. At the beginning, I really just was looking for some jobs. It wasn't official that I was going to do residential or commercial. I hadn't quite figured that out. There was no business plan. Very, very, very organic back in those days, I would say, of how I started the business. One of my first projects was with the Greater Boston Food Bank. Got that lead through someone that I'd worked with at one of the local dealerships, furniture dealerships. Probably didn't charge them enough, but got the job and
probably not.
was able to, it is a nonprofit, so there's that.
Yeah.
But it was one of my kind of first forays into doing jobs on my own, and I loved it. It was great, but it was doing what I knew. It was doing commercial office space, basically, within the food bank and working with an incredible architect. I knew how all those relationships worked and working with mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and, structural and lighting designers and you name it. So I was very familiar with that whole world. And then I want to say a few months into working on that job, I got a lead for a project down on the South Shore. So if you can kind of picture Boston's in the middle, I'm just north of the city, 20 minutes where I'm located. But this job is about 45 minutes south. Well, probably about a half an hour, 45 minutes in traffic. And interviewed and landed up getting this project. And I was like, well, this is fun. It's a whole house. Thinking that those were always the projects.
Right.
I was like, this is amazing. I'm getting to do the whole house. So nice. And then I'll just get the next house. Get the next house, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of that project, I realized I fell with my bum in the butter, as we say, like, okay, that's not how it works. It's a lot of hard work and slog to get those jobs. And I was just very lucky, I would say, to get this particular couple as my first client. And that led to, I want to say, I even worked in a house for his son and daughter a couple of years ago. So I've worked on probably a total of 4 or 5 homes for this couple over the years.
Okay. That's great.
So they really were my unicorn.
Yeah.
And it was a great way to start in residential design. But once I did that first project, I was kind of sold. I was definitely not doing things in the manner that I would do them on projects now, but it was great experience just to use all of my tools that I had in my tool belt from all my years of working in commercial and hospitality and kind of figure out, okay, well, how can I use these in the residential world? The biggest learning curve is obviously, as you know too, I know, Rebecca, is the all your vendors are just completely different in residential. You are not going to Chicago to the Mart to go and source all of your furnishings. You are going to High Point, Carolina. There's many other places, but that's the biggest comparison. So I'd never been to High Point. I didn't really know what that meant and how that would work and how I could better source things. So I wish I had gone to High Point a little bit earlier on in my career, even though I didn't know what it was all about in my residential career, I should say. I do feel like just throwing yourself into the fire with learning about those materials and starting to make those connections and really good vendor connections is so important, because it takes a really long time to learn about so many of those vendors, and they're a dime a dozen, right? If you're looking for one type of fabric, but to start to build those relationships and understanding those different companies to see who you really want to work with, who do you like working with. So it was really developing all those relationships that I'd made in the commercial world over 8 years in Boston, and essentially saying scrap those and now start anew with all of your vendors. Could I design? Yes. Could I space plan? Yes. Could I deal with the scale and all of those things? Yes. But where do I source? Where do I go for all of those items? That was like a brand new career.
Okay. Yeah, that is a big learning curve, especially when you're just starting out on your own. You hadn't directly come from a residential design firm where you're already working with these vendors and accounts and things like that. So you had to kind of go out on your own and discover it. But that's good advice, I think, to recommend going to High Point or other markets earlier in your career, or maybe just like, the first 6 months or something, just to get familiar with these vendors and understand what the whole industry is about.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that is definitely something that can get you on the right footing, and you got to start somewhere. And I think a lot of people lean into retail, which I did. I remembered, specifying a lot of things, that made my life easy. Like, oh, I can go to Ethan Allen and I can, get this and that. This is, 16 years ago. But just to learn about direct trade resources right from the get-go will only put you in good standing if you are thinking of going in that residential career route, because you are just losing control and losing money by not going direct to the trades, to the resources that you can access directly.
Yeah. So since 2008, you've had some great projects, and you've also been published a lot locally, I know, with your Boston magazines and newspapers and things like that. What's the trick to getting published so many times?
Well, I'd say the biggest trick is having an incredible photographer. That's, I'd say, first and foremost. And photographing, well, back up there. You always want to make sure that you photograph all of your work. But if you don't love a project that you have done and can't see it looking fresh on your website, I'd say in 5 to 10 years, because sometimes they need to last that long. You don't photograph a project every month. Don't photograph it. Don't waste the time. It's an enormous investment of your time, the photography cost, and, the days and days that you take to prepare for it, but also, buying the flowers, buying the styling elements. I do always try to help offset my costs with inviting other people that partnered with me on my project like, if I worked with someone with the kitchen or the builder, or if there were a lot of drapes and my drapery workroom wants to also have it, that is one way to certainly split the costs. But I'd say first and foremost, getting those projects photographed and giving it your all. Like, don't settle. If you think the client landed up putting in 4 of their own kitchen stools, say, I mean, I hope that you're not photographing a job if your client put in their own stools, but say they did, go out and make sure that you bring your own stools and put those in for that shoot, because you'll never like the photograph if it's something that, say, was reused. I think that you want to wholeheartedly buy into and love everything that you are knowing that you're going to eventually be presenting onto your website, and also be very, very involved in the photo shoot. Ask your photographer questions like, what types of shots do you think are going to work better for my website, as well as maybe having use for editorials?
Yes. Yeah.
I try to bridge the line. I've always loved styling, so I do end up styling my own photo shoots, but I know there's a lot of people that are great designers, but they're not great stylists.
Mm-hmm.
So I think hiring a stylist, I have done that in the past, but I found that I really love doing it myself. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely hiring all the right people, down to people that can help you pick the right flowers and the additional styling elements. I'm not talking about lamps and pillows. I'm talking about, the trinkets and the books that might go on the coffee table, and the flowers. Those are really the styling elements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to fully answer that question about how to get published, I think it's going to a lot of seminars, I'd say, over the years, whenever there was one on how to get published, whenever there was an opportunity to go and meet the editor of, say, Boston Home or Modern Luxury Interiors, North Shore Home. These are all of my local magazines.
Mm-hmm.
In my early days, I really tried to make sure that I could make some connections and try to say hi to people and tell them who I was.
Yeah.
And then my photographer, who I've been working with, I want to say it's almost 10 years now, she was also really instrumental in helping me create those relationships with some of the editors.
Nice. Yes.
And being able to get work in front of them on a first name basis.
Mm-hmm.
So probably great photography and relationship building is going to be really important in trying to get published.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Because I know everybody would love to see their work in a magazine that's on the stands locally or wherever, and just to be able to tell their family and friends, look, that's my project, So that's great advice.
It is really cool. It doesn't get old.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. All right. So, such great advice that you've had. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience who is looking to get into the career?
Yeah, I think that for any listeners out there that are looking to get into interior design, I would say that working in a really large firm for me, and different sized firms, has really been instrumental in helping me to get to the place where I am today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are different roundabout ways of doing this, whether you're going to physically study interior design or do, shorter certificate programs. I do love the idea of having education behind what you do. I do believe that it was a really important step in my whole career trajectory. But I think just knowing that working in larger firms is always going to give you an opportunity to tap into the brains of so many different people and to see how so many different people work on a project. For instance, if you're working on your own, say you'll end up wanting to go into residential design on your own, you'd be able to take so many parts and pieces of all of the jobs that all of these people may be doing, because you're essentially going to be doing all of those yourself, and just have a much better knowledge base of how to do many different things.
You're saying it's a great place to study all those different aspects of the job that you'll have to do yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Justine, for coming on today and sharing your story. It's so interesting, and I think our audience will like it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad that I was able to chat and offer some advice.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
That was so great being able to talk with Justine about her journey from Cape Town, South Africa to Boston, and all of the exciting adventures she had in between. And I think that in conclusion, we can see that for her, working with all of these larger firms and in different scenarios and working with different teams, and really gave her the confidence to be able to go out on her own once she decided to do that. Like, she has already crossed that bridge of working with all of the architects and engineers. And so it wasn't as daunting for her because she had had some experience seeing all of the different aspects of design that she had to do or worked with other people who has done them. So great advice to work in larger firms if you can before you get started in your career. And it really gives you some opportunities, opens the door like for her to even come to the States. So we really appreciate learning from Justine, and you can go and find links to see her beautiful portfolio that has been published in a lot of Boston magazines. Her website will be in the show notes, Justine Sterling Design. All right, so next week we will have another great episode, and until then, stay creative. Thanks for listening. If you love this episode, please leave a rating and a review. This helps me reach other curious creatives like you. If you have a topic request or would like to contact me, simply head over to my website, rwarddesign.com, or email me at podcast@rwarddesign.com.